In February of 1902, a search party working the high ground above Cutter's Gap found a boy sitting against the trunk of a burned chestnut, wearing a nightshirt gone grey with wood smoke, and nothing on his feet but strips of rabbit hide bound on with twine. He did not run, he did not call out. He watched the 6 men come up through the frost-killed laurel with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that the safest thing a body can do is not be noticed. And when the lead man, a farmer named Otho Kestrel, finally crouched in front of him and asked his name, the boy answered in a voice gone hoarse from disuse that his name was Jubal Merrow, and that his mother had told him to count until someone came. He did not say how long he had been counting. When they carried him down off the mountain, his weight came in at 31 pounds, and the doctor who examined him in Cutter's Gap wrote that a boy of 7 should carry closer to 50. His feet, once the hide wrappings came off, showed frostbite blackening 3 of the toes on the left foot, old enough that the doctor judged it had set in some 2 weeks prior. The Merrow family, 5 of them, had not been seen at the trading post since the first week of January. Nobody had gone looking because in that country, in that season, a family that kept to itself through the cold months was simply how the winter got survived, not a thing anyone thought to remark on. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Cutter's Gap sat in the high country, where North Carolina's Blue Ridge folds back on itself, a scatter of homesteads reached by a wagon track that iced over from November to March and turned to a bog of red clay every spring after. The nearest telegraph office was in Boone, the better part of 2 days out by horse in fair weather, and the nearest circuit court sat only twice a year. Josiah and Ellen Merrow had taken up the ridge, 2 ridges back from the Gap in 1894, on land nobody else had wanted because the creek ran dry 3 years out of 5, and the frost came early. They kept a hog, some chickens, and a garden patch that Ellen worked with a hoe her husband had forged from a broken plough blade. Josiah cut shingles for the mill in season, and trapped in the off months, the way most men on that ridge did, stretching one thin trade over another to make a year add up. They had 3 children besides Jubal, ranging from a girl of 11 down to an infant not yet walking. None of that set the Merrows apart. What did, mildly and infrequently discussed at the mill and the trading post, was that Josiah had built his cabin with a second-story half again as tall as it needed to be, and that he had done it alone, over 2 winters, without asking a neighbor for so much as a nail. A trapper named Amos Vance, who ran a line along the same ridge, later told the sheriff that he had passed within a half-mile of the Merrow cabin in December and seen smoke from the chimney and thought nothing more of it. That was the last anyone could account for seeing sign of the family before Jubal was found. The track to the cabin, such as it was, ran along a shelf of ground above a hollow the local families called Widow's Fork, not for any documented widow, but for a story nobody could trace back to its origin, the kind of name that outlives every person who could once have explained it. It was into this country, cold and thinly settled and slow to notice an absence, that Sheriff Wyatt Pruitt rode out on the 9th of February with 2 deputies and the county physician, a widower named Emmett Halloran, who kept a practice in Cutter's Gap and who had delivered Jubal Merrow into the world 7 years before. The ride took the better part of a day even in fair weather, up a track that narrowed past the last cleared field into little more than a deer path threading between chestnut and hemlock, and Pruitt's own daybook notes that the party lost the light twice and had to make camp within sight of the Merrow chimney rather than push on in the dark, an ordinary caution in that country that would later strike him, he wrote, as the one decision of the whole affair he was glad of. Jubal talked to the sheriff twice, once at the Kestrel farmhouse on the night he was found, and once 4 days later, once he had eaten enough to hold a coherent sentence together. Pruitt kept notes both times, and the 2 accounts, laid side by side in his daybook, do not disagree so much as the second one simply says more. In the first, the boy said only that his mother and father and sisters had gone into the back room and had not come out, and that he had been told to stay in the kitchen and count the wallboards until someone came for him. He did not cry telling it. Pruitt wrote that down specifically, that the boy delivered the account the way a much older person recites a chore, without inflection, as though the strangeness of it had not yet occurred to him, because he had never known any other way for a house to behave. His hands, the sheriff noted, were raw across the knuckles in a pattern that did not match rope burn or frostbite, a pattern closer to a hand, dragged again and again across a rough seam of wood. By the second interview, Jubal had begun to add detail, and it is here that the record starts to trouble the reader rather than simply sadden him. He said the back room had not always been in the house. He said his father built the cabin with the room already gone, a blank wall where a room should be, and that sometime in December, he could not say exactly when, the wall grew a door that had not been there the day before, and his mother told him and his sisters the room was for family only, and that Jubal was the only one small enough to still be counted separate from it. He said his mother made him promise never to open that door himself, and never to let the fire go all the way out, because the room did not care for the cold the same way the rest of the house did, and that if it got cold enough, it would come looking for warmth on its own. He said the counting had been his mother's idea, that she taught him to count the boards of the kitchen wall from the corner out, 61 of them, every morning and every night, and that so long as the number came out the same both times, the house was holding steady. He said the one night the number came out different, 60, not 61, was the same night his mother went into the back room and did not come back out to check on him again. Pruitt's daybook records what he and Halloran found when they reached the cabin on the 10th of February, and the entries hold to their own flat register the whole way through. The kitchen matched what Jubal had described, a single room with a hearth and a table set for 5, 3-place settings of cold, mold-blooming food, and a 4th chair pushed back as though someone had risen mid-meal and never returned to it. Halloran examined the food and judged it had sat since sometime in the first half of January, consistent with the boy's account. Pruitt's note on the back wall reads, in full, that a doorway stood in the north wall of the kitchen, where the cabin's original framing showed no doorway had been cut, the studs on either side sawn clean and fitted, rather than broken through, meaning the opening had been built rather than forced. Behind the door sat a second room, roughly 10 feet by 12, empty of furniture and of any sign that 4 people had recently occupied it, its floorboards swept bare in a way the rest of the cabin was not. There were no bodies, there was no blood, no sign of struggle, nothing Pruitt could enter into his book as evidence of a crime that fell under his authority to name. What he did enter, in the same clerical hand he used for stolen livestock and disputed property lines, was that the interior wall of the back room, the one it shared with the kitchen, bore 61 shallow marks cut into the wood in a neat row at the height of a child's reaching hand, and that a 62nd mark had been started and abandoned, the blade or nail that made it dragged half an inch and then stopped. Pruitt closed the file within the month for want of any chargeable act, the same customary language he would have used for a family that simply moved on without notice, though nothing else about the case matched that language, and the county paid Otho Kestrel and his wife a small sum to raise Jubal until a cousin of Ellen's, 2 counties over, could be located to take him in. Circuit Court did not sit again in that district until the autumn, and by the time it did, the Merrow file had already been folded into the county's general record of missing persons, 4 names added to a list running back to the war years without much hope attached to any of them. Word got around the gap regardless, the way it does in a country where everyone's business travels faster than the mail, and for a good while people rode the long way around Widow's Fork rather than pass under that cabin's tall second story after dark. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The Merrow cabin was not the only house in that country with a room that had not been part of the original plan, and Pruitt was not the only lawman who had written such a thing into a book, before closing the file for want of anything more to say. 11 years earlier, in 1891, a trapper named Silas Corder had been found dead in his line shack 40 miles to the south, in Watauga County, by a hunting partner who told the local magistrate that the shack, which Corder had built himself and lived in alone for 6 seasons, held a second room behind a wall his partner swore had not existed the autumn before. Corder was found seated at his own table, with no mark on him the county doctor could name as cause, and the magistrate's finding, entered without elaboration, read death by natural causes, unwitnessed. The second room in Corder's shack stood empty but for a set of deep, evenly spaced scratches along the interior wall, and the partner who found him would not go back inside to count them. The second case reaches further back, to a logging camp above the Tow River that the timber company's own ledger records as fully staffed on a Friday in November of 1883, and empty by the following Monday, 22 men gone with their bedrolls and tools left behind, the cook fire cold, one man's boots still standing beside his bunk. The superintendent who investigated wrote to his office that he had found, in the wall of the cook shack, a doorway the camp's own building record showed had never been authorized or built, and that he was recommending the site be abandoned rather than restaffed. He resigned his position inside the year and moved his family to Ohio, and the company's own personnel ledger, which otherwise records every hire and discharge in that district down to the dollar of severance owed, lists no reason for his departure at all, only the date. What unites these 3 records, separated by 19 years and 2 counties, and every difference of trade and circumstance, a family, a trapper, a logging crew, is not a story anyone could have coordinated between them. It is a shared detail, appearing in each case in the plain, uninterested language of a man filling out a form he had no reason to embellish, a wall that had not always been a wall, and a room behind it that the people living closest to it treated less like a discovery and more like an arrangement already agreed to. What makes the Merrow file harder to set aside than either of the other 2 is not what it contains, but what has since gone missing from it. Pruitt's daybook for that district survives nearly complete in the county archive, an unbroken run from 1896 to 1911, except for a gap of 9 days in February of 1902 that falls precisely across his second interview with Jubal and his visit to the cabin itself. The pages are not torn, they are cut, close along the binding, clean enough that a casual look at the spine would miss it, the kind of removal that takes a straight edge and a private hour rather than a hurried tear. Dr. Halloran's own casebook, kept separately, records the date he examined Jubal, the boy's weight, the state of his feet, and then simply stops making entries for that patient, though a marginal note in a different hand, added later, records that Halloran requested and received a transfer to a post in the western part of the state that same spring, after 11 years of unbroken practice in Cutter's Gap. He never came back to that county. The cousin who eventually took Jubal in, a woman named Prudence Yarnell of Mitchell County, left behind a single letter to a relative describing the boy as quiet, watchful of doorways, and given to counting under his breath at the change of the light, a letter the family kept rather than surrendered to any archive, which is the only reason it survives at all. Of the 61 marks Pruitt counted on that interior wall, only a photograph remains now, taken decades later by a regional historian who located the cabin's ruin before it was lost to a controlled burn, and even that photograph shows the wall partly collapsed, the count no longer possible to check by eye. The transcript Pruitt took down at the Kestrel farmhouse on the 14th of February survives complete, 4 pages in his own hand, and it deserves setting down here in the words the sheriff recorded, because a summary of it cannot carry what the boy actually said, while a grown man wrote as fast as his hand would move. The boy, being asked to state what he knew of his family's whereabouts, did state that his mother, Ellen Merrow, had told him 3 days before Christmas that the back room had come open again, that this happened from time to time, and that there was nothing to fear in it so long as the counting was kept faithful morning and night. He stated that his father had gone into the room first, on the second night, saying he would only be a moment, and that his father did not come back out that night, nor any night after, and that his mother told him his father was helping the room settle in for the winter, same as a man might help a strange horse settle into a new barn. He stated that his sister Ruth, the eldest, went in on the 9th night after their father, and that his mother cried after Ruth went in, but told Jubal it was only because Ruth was so grown now, and grown children go where they are needed. He stated that his mother carried the baby in herself on what he believed was the last night of January, and that before she went she pressed his hand flat against the 61 boards one final time, and told him the number must never come out wrong again as long as he lived in that house, and that if it ever did come out wrong he was to leave by the front door and not look back at the windows, because windows were how the room learned a face. He stated that on the morning he was found, the number came out 60, and that he stood at the wall a long while trying to make it come out right again, moving his finger back along the boards until his knuckles bled, and that when it would not come out right, no matter how he counted it, he did as his mother told him, and went out the front door without looking at the windows, and did not stop walking until the cold put him down against a burned tree, which was where the men found him. The cabin itself stood empty for more than 50 years before a controlled burn took what was left of it in the summer of 1956, and today the only physical trace of the Merrow homestead is a foundation of fieldstone, half swallowed by rhododendron, above what still shows, on the newer county maps, as Widow's Fork, with no explanation offered anywhere for the name. The 4 transcript pages passed out of the county archive sometime before 1940, their absence noted only by a card in the file drawer marked removed, and they resurfaced decades later in a private collection 2 counties over, sold at an estate auction alongside a box of unrelated farm ledgers, where they remain today, held by a family with no relation to the Merrows and no particular interest in what they own. Jubal Merrow lived to be an old man, by every account a quiet one, and he is said to have kept, for the rest of his life, a habit his cousin's descendants still bring up when the story comes around at all, a habit of running his finger along any wall he passed, counting under his breath, and going still if the number ever failed to match the count from the time before. If Pruitt's daybook is taken at its word, and Halloran's casebook alongside it, and the letter Prudence Yarnell kept rather than handed over, then somewhere in that high country a boy was taught to keep a house steady by counting it into staying the same, and the one time the number changed, the sheriff found no reason in his book to call it the boy's mistake. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.